People of Reddit who have encountered ghosts or other supernatural beings. What was your experience like? What happened?
The forest was supposed to be our refuge. After we eloped, with our families cutting ties and turning their backs on us, the wilderness seemed like the only place where we could be free. We found a patch of land near a river, hidden from prying eyes, and built a makeshift tent with whatever materials we could scavenge. It wasn't much, just a place to rest and hide. Food was scarce, and though guilt ate away at us, we began stealing fruits from a nearby plantation. The owner was an old lady who seemed to live alone, her wrinkled face hard and cold whenever we caught glimpses of her. We felt ashamed of taking from her, but we had no choice. Survival outweighed morals. Nights in the forest were always unsettling, but one night something changed. It started with the rustling. At first we thought it was the wind playing tricks on us, but this was different, heavy, deliberate. It came from all around, encircling our tent. My partner gripped my hand tightly, his knuckles pale in the dim light of our lantern. Then we saw it, shadows moving in the darkness. Not the kind cast by trees or animals, but something darker. It was as if the shadows were alive, slithering and shifting against the blackness of the night. We barely had time to react before we heard the sound, something dragging across the forest floor, slow and laboured. It was followed by a man's scream, piercing and raw, cutting through the silence like a blade. Then came the splash of water, sharp and final. The river was close enough that we could hear it, the sound reverberating in the stillness. My heart raced as we clung to each other, too terrified to move, let alone step outside. That night felt endless. Every creak, every whisper of wind set us on edge. The shadows never returned, but the memory of them was enough. Neither of us slept. We stayed huddled together, watching the flimsy walls of our tent as if at any moment they would collapse and let the darkness in. When dawn finally broke, we hesitated before stepping out. The forest seemed different, almost too quiet, as if it had been holding its breath all night. We decided to investigate the sounds from the river. Our footsteps felt heavy as we made our way through the undergrowth, each snap of a twig beneath our feet making us flinch. But when we reached the riverbank, there was nothing, no drag marks, no blood, no sign of struggle. It was as if the night had swallowed everything. Confused and unnerved, we returned to the plantation later that day, intending to gather more fruits. The old lady spotted us this time, her eyes narrowing as she approached. Instead of scolding us, she spoke in a low, measured tone. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "This land doesn't belong to me alone." Her words sent a chill down my spine. When we pressed her for answers, she hesitated, then finally told us about her husband. He had been murdered 5 years ago, right there in the plantation. According to her, he had been dragged to the river by someone or something and drowned. His body was never found, only his hat floating on the water's surface. She said she still felt his presence, restless and angry, especially on nights like the one we had just endured. That night, we returned to our tent, shaken but too stubborn to leave. We built a small fire and stayed close, trying to keep the darkness at bay. As the flames flickered, I noticed something moving just beyond the light. At first it was subtle, like a shimmer in the air, but then it grew. The shadows returned, darker and more defined this time, crawling along the ground like smoke. One shadow began to rise, taking shape. It was a figure, tall and thin, its limbs impossibly long and crooked. Its face, or what should have been its face, was a void. An empty blackness that seemed to suck in the light around it. The sound of dragging returned, and this time it was accompanied by a wet, guttural growl. My partner grabbed a stick from the fire, brandishing it like a weapon, but the shadow didn't flinch. Instead, it moved closer, the dragging sound growing louder until it was deafening. The figure reached out with a hand that looked more like a claw, its fingers elongated and sharp. Before we could react, the fire went out, plunging us into complete darkness. In that moment, I felt a cold, slimy grip on my arm, pulling me forward. My partner screamed my name, and I screamed back, thrashing wildly. Somehow, I broke free, stumbling backward and falling to the ground. The next thing I remember is waking up to the first rays of sunlight filtering through the trees. My partner was beside me, pale and trembling, but alive. We didn't speak as we packed our things, too afraid to even look at each other. By midday, we were gone, leaving the forest and its horrors behind. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that we didn't escape. Sometimes in the dead of night, I hear the dragging sound again, faint and distant, like it's still searching for us. And I wonder what would have happened if it had caught us that night. If this chilling tale gave you goosebumps, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories like this. Thank you for tuning in to Ghostly Echoes. Until next time,